Hello, welcome back to the deep end. We are diving in today, and I have to say, just to kick things off right away, welcome to the Funeral Channel Network podcast.
It is, well, it's certainly a very distinctive corner of the audio world to be inhabiting today, isn't it?
It really is, and I know I can already hear the listeners right now.
Oh, I'm sure they have thoughts.
Right, because that title, it sounds incredibly specific. I mean, maybe even a little too specific for some people tuning in. You might be looking at your feed right now thinking, oh, why on earth do I need to know about the back page of a funeral program?
Yeah, is this really for me? Do I really need to know about cardstock and font choices for the bereaved?
Exactly. It's like, did I download the wrong deep dive? But here is the thing, and this is honestly why I was so excited about today's stack of sources. This isn't really about paper.
No.
And it isn't even really about funerals at its core.
No, not at all. If you look past the surface, and I mean just slightly past the surface, this is a masterclass in human behavior.
It is. It's this fascinating case study in human psychology, linguistics, and what our source material calls social navigation.
Which is a great term.
It is. It is really about the art of gracious boundaries. And let's be honest, who among us doesn't need a crash course in setting boundaries that don't make everyone completely hate us?
Right, which is something we all struggle with, usually on a daily basis. I mean, just in normal life.
Oh, constantly.
But in this context, the stakes are incredibly high. It's about how we manage expectations during the absolute most emotionally charged moments of our lives.
Right. And at the center of this deep dive is a conflict that I think everyone has felt, even if they haven't put a name to it or articulated it.
Definitely.
It's this tension found in our source material, which is titled The Art of Gracious Boundaries in Funeral Program Etiquette. And the tension is between public mourning and private grief.
Yes, specifically the difference between the funeral service itself and the reception, or the repast, as it's often called, that follows it.
It is a critical distinction, and it's one that causes a surprising amount of anxiety, because we tend to think of funerals as these monolithic events.
Right, you say you're going to the funeral.
Exactly, you just go to the funeral, but they are actually a series of very different social chambers, and each one has completely different rules.
Oh, absolutely. Let's talk about that anxiety for a second. Let's paint the picture of what the source basically outlines as the nightmare scenario, because I think we have all been there, or at least we fear being there.
Yes, let's walk through it, because it is so relatable.
Set the scene for us.
Okay, so you are a guest at a funeral. Maybe it's a coworker's parent.
Yeah.
Or, a neighbor you knew growing up but you haven't seen in 10 years.
Right, a peripheral connection.
Exactly. So you've sat through the service, you've listened to the eulogies, you've maybe shed a tear or two, you've sung the hymns. Badly, if you're me.
Same here.
And then the service ends. The pallbearers are moving out, carrying the casket. The organ is playing that exit music, which is usually something very swelling and final.
It's very cinematic.
It is. So you shuffle out of the pew, you get into the aisle, and you walk out into the sunlight or into the foyer of the building. And suddenly, you are hit with this wave of panic.
The unspoken question.
Yes. What happens next? It's this incredibly visceral moment. Do I go to the reception? Is there food? Is it for everyone?
And then the guilt starts.
Right.
Yeah.
If I go, am I crashing a private family moment? But if I don't go, does it look like I don't care? Does it look like I'm just rushing off to bait traffic?
It's the uncertainty loop. You are entirely trapped between the desire to be supportive and the fear of being intrusive.
Which is the worst feeling.
And because it's a funeral, you can't exactly turn to the person next to you and shout, "Hey, are we getting sandwiches?"
No, you absolutely cannot do that. So you're standing there on the church steps, maybe checking your phone, looking around, trying to see what other people are doing. It's pure social awkwardness layered right on top of grief.
It's a very visceral, sweaty palm moment. You start analyzing the crowd like a detective.
Oh, yeah. Okay, that guy looks like a cousin. He's going to his car. That lady looks like a neighbor. She's leaving. What do I do?
And that very specific panic is exactly what our source text is aiming to solve. The mission of this deep dive, based on the essay we are analyzing today, is to deconstruct how we use language.
Right.
Very specific, highly calculated language to tell people no without hurting their feelings.
To tell them they aren't invited to lunch, but still make them feel completely loved and appreciated, which honestly seems like an impossible tightrope walk. Usually hearing no just feels like a slap in the face.
Is extremely difficult, but the source argues it's absolutely necessary. It's about how we can craft a message that is explicit enough to stop uninvited guests.
So they don't actually drive to the restaurant and stand there awkwardly.
Exactly.
Mhm.
But gentle enough to maintain their dignity. It is, as the source suggests, a masterclass in empathy and communication design.
I really love that phrase. Communication design for emotions. We design websites, we design kitchens, but we rarely think about intentionally designing the emotional flow of an event,
We usually just let it happen and hope for the best.
which is a terrible strategy for a funeral. So let's get into the source material overview. We are looking at an essay that deeply examines the linguistic, cultural, and psychological considerations of wording private repast invitations,
Yes.
and specifically the strategy of placing that wording on the back page of the funeral program itself.
The source identifies three key themes we're going to unpack today. First, the idea of the funeral program, not just as a piece of paper, but as a communicative artifact.
I love the academic spin on that.
It gives it weight. Second, the psychology of cognitive load during grief, which is a truly fascinating concept regarding how the brain essentially short-circuits during loss.
That part really blew my mind, the actual neuroscience of why we can't make simple decisions when we're sad.
Exactly. And third, the actual linguistic strategies. Using passive voice, using gratitude as a buffer, the actual nuts and bolts of the grammar of grief.
And just to underscore why this matters for everyone listening, this isn't just for funeral directors.
Oh, definitely not.
If you have ever had to plan a wedding, a big birthday party, or any event where you have to draw a line between everyone and the inner circle, this is highly relevant.
It is universal. It's about the physics of social circles.
Mm.
Every single human gathering has layers, and navigating those layers without hurting people is a vital life skill.
So true. So let's set the context. We have these two distinct spheres, the public service and the private repast. How does the source define the funeral service itself?
The source defines the funeral service as an open invitation. By its very nature, a funeral is a public declaration of loss. It casts a very wide net.
Right.
You have the immediate family, sure, but you also have coworkers, neighbors, the person who sat next to the deceased in third grade, members of the faith community, the mailman.
It is the public face of loss. It's the come one, come all part of the event. It's democratic in that way. We put the obituary in the paper or online, and essentially we are broadcasting to the world, if you knew him, come honor him.
Correct. It's a community ritual. It serves a very deep sociological function of acknowledging that a member of the tribe has passed away.
It's the gathering of the tribe.
But then you have the repast. And the source takes some time to trace the historical origins of this. It notes that the repast has ancient roots in communal meals. It symbolizes continuity and sustenance.
Breaking bread. There's something very primal about needing to eat after seeing a body or being near death.
Exactly. In many cultures, eating after a death is a way of proving that life goes on. It's about nourishment, literally fueling the body to keep grieving, because grief is exhausting.
It burns calories.
It really does. But in the modern context, and specifically regarding the vibe of the event, the source describes the repast as intimate. It is a space for the inner circle.
It's a completely different chamber.
It's for reflection, emotional release, and frankly, just taking your shoes off and breathing.
Taking your shoes off. That's the key image for me. The service is formal. You're sitting up straight in a pew. The repast is where you slump.
Which leads us directly to the problem. The source calls it the overlap problem.
Or the Venn diagram from hell.
Yes. The source identifies this as the assumption trap. Because the service is open to everyone, guests often operate on a very basic assumption. If I went to the church, I go to the food.
It seems like a perfectly logical progression. Church equals step one, food equals step two. It's like a wedding. You don't go to the ceremony and then just go home, usually. You expect a reception.
It does follow a certain cultural logic. We are conditioned for it. But the consequence, as the text points out, is that when expectations aren't managed, grieving families face deeply uncomfortable social situations.
Oh, man.
Imagine being a widow who just wants to sit with her children, eat a sandwich in peace, and suddenly she has to entertain her late husband's co-worker from 20 years ago who just showed up expecting a hot buffet.
That sounds absolutely exhausting just thinking about it. You're forced into hostess mode when you are barely holding it together to begin with. You have to smile, you have to say, oh, thank you so much for coming, while inside you just want to scream or go to sleep.
It is. And the source makes a very strong, very vital point here. Limiting attendance isn't about being mean.
Right.
It isn't snobbery. It isn't even necessarily about saving money on catering, though that can obviously be a practical factor. Primarily, It is about emotional self-preservation.
Emotional self-preservation. That is a powerful phrase. It creates a complete shift in perspective. You aren't excluding people. You are actively protecting the family's energy.
And that leads us directly into the psychology of it all. The source spends a significant amount of time discussing cognitive load.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because cognitive load sounds like something from a productivity manual or a computer science textbook, not a funeral guide. What does it actually mean in this context?
So, strictly speaking, cognitive load refers to the amount of working memory resources being used by your brain at any one time. Think of your brain like a computer's RAM.
Okay, I'm with you.
You only have so much space to run programs simultaneously. The source explains that grief acts almost like a physiological trauma to the brain. It eats up all the RAM.
So it's not just an emotion, it's a physical state of limited capacity.
Precisely.
Yeah.
When you are bereaved, your concentration shoots down, your decision-making creates immense fatigue, and your emotional regulation is incredibly fragile. Your brain is essentially running on a backup generator.
I love that analogy.
You know how when the power goes out at your house and you're on the backup generator, you could only run the fridge and maybe one light bulb? You can't run the AC and the microwave and the TV all at once.
Right, everything trips.
Grief is the backup generator. You are only running the essential functions.
So asking a grieving person to perform complex social tasks is like asking a computer that's actively crashing to run a high-end video game.
That is a great way to put it. It's an issue of pure bandwidth. The prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that handles executive function, planning, and all that complex social nuance, is completely overwhelmed by the processing of loss.
It's busy.
Extremely busy. It is processing the massive reality that this person is gone forever. It doesn't have any bandwidth left for figuring out, how do I politely tell Bob he can't come to lunch?
And the specific burden the source highlights here is the burden of verbalizing.
Yes. Imagine that widow again. If there's no written boundary, she or someone else in the family has to verbally explain to people face to face that they are not invited.
Oh, that is awful. That conversation is a total minefield. You have to look them in the eye. You have to physically see their disappointment or confusion.
It's way too heavy. It requires social tact, it requires firmness, and it risks outright conflict. That is simply too much cognitive load for a grieving brain.
Yeah, it forces them to make micro decisions and manage other people's emotional reactions when they can barely manage their own breathing.
So the solution is to outsource that boundary entirely.
Outsourcing the boundary. I like that.
Written communication, the program itself, removes the need for the family to verbally enforce the boundary. It does the heavy lifting so the family doesn't have to. It protects their mental resources.
It's like having a bouncer, but it's just a piece of paper.
A very polite, entirely silent bouncer. It takes the confrontation out of the equation completely.
The source also talks about emotional safety and the idea of performance. And this really resonated with me. The idea that at the funeral service, the family is essentially on stage.
Yes. The source argues deeply that grieving individuals need a space where they don't have to perform anymore. During the service, they are accepting condolences, they are trying to hold it together, they are being watched by hundreds of people.
Everyone is looking at the front row. They are checking to see how the widow is doing. Is she crying? Is she stoic?
Exactly. They are wearing the strong mask. You always hear people whisper, "Oh, she's holding up so well."
And that is a performance. It takes physical and mental effort to hold up well.
Right. And the private repast is the sanctuary from that performance. It allows the family to decompress and take the mask off entirely.
Because you can't be strong for 8 hours straight.
You can't. Maybe they need to laugh hysterically, which happens very often in grief, by the way. It's a massive tension release. Maybe they need to sit in complete silence.
Or maybe they need to cry in a way that isn't dignified, the kind of ugly crying you really don't want an audience for.
And you cannot do that if your boss is in the room.
Yeah.
Or if your distant cousin, who absolutely loves drama and gossip, is sitting across the table watching you eat potato salad.
You cannot. And that is why the expert analysis in the text highlights that boundaries, when they are communicated well, create safety. Ambiguity, on the other hand, not knowing who is going to show up, creates stress.
It keeps the mask glued on. If you don't know who is walking through the door of the reception hall, you have to stay on high alert.
So we have clearly established the need. We need a boundary. We need to protect the family's cognitive load. We need to let them take the mask off and just be messy if they need to be. Now let's talk about the tool to achieve this. the funeral program itself.
The communicative artifact.
It sounds so academic, but it's really true. The source talks a lot about the evolution of the program, because it used to be just a leaflet, right? Order of service, hymn 1, prayer, hymn 2, exit. Very utilitarian.
Correct. But historically, it has shifted dramatically. It has become a multifaceted document. Now it has extensive bios, photo collages, poems, a long list of acknowledgments.
It's almost a mini biography. It tells the story of the life.
It does. And crucially, the source notes the keepsake factor.
This is big, because these things don't get thrown away. I have a drawer full of them at my house. I think most people do.
Most people do. People keep them in their Bibles, in desk drawers, in memory boxes in the attic. They are preserved for years, sometimes generations. I've seen people pull out funeral programs from 20 or 30 years ago to check a family date.
And the source points out that this permanence raises the stakes significantly. The words written on these programs last forever.
That is terrifying when you think about it.
It really is. It means if you are rude on the back page, that rudeness is archived for your descendants to see.
It's immortalized rudeness. So you really have to get it right. You can't just scribble private party in Sharpie at the bottom. You can't have a typo. It has to be deliberate.
You do. And the source focuses specifically on the back page as a transitional space.
This is all about timing and user experience.
I found this part fascinating. The traffic controller concept. Walk us through that.
Sure. The source notes that the back page is typically read after the service concludes. Think about the physical behavior of a guest.
Okay.
The service ends, the exit music plays, people are standing up, maybe putting on their coats or grabbing their purses. They're shifting from the formal ceremony to informal departure.
That is the exact moment they look down at the piece of paper in their hand.
Exactly. They're actively looking for cues. What do I do next? The back page acts as the traffic controller. It guides the guests out the door without anyone having to make a super awkward announcement from the pulpit.
Which is truly the worst. Could you imagine? And now, if only the cool people, the really inner circle, could come to the reception hall, the rest of you, please go to your cars.
Right, you can't say that. It sounds terribly exclusionary. It sounds harsh, echoing over a microphone. So the paper has to do the heavy lifting silently.
The challenge, as the text lays out, is that it must be explicit enough to stop the uninvited guests so they don't drive to the restaurant, but gentle enough to maintain dignity.
So how do we do that? Let's get into the how-to, the linguistic strategies for gracious exclusion. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is the actual toolkit for the listeners.
Yes, let's get into the strategies. The core strategy the source advocates is clarity without harshness. The goal is communicating limitation without implying scarcity or assigning any blame.
Exactly.
Give me the bad version first. What should we avoid? What are the immediate red flags when drafting this?
You want to avoid any negative constructions. Phrases like not open to the public, or invitation only, or strictly private.
Oh, wow. That sounds like a nightclub. You're not on the list. VIPs only.
Right. It feels like a rejection. It feels like you are looking at the guest and saying, you aren't good enough to eat with us. It triggers an immediate defensive response. It makes the guest feel small.
I would definitely feel slighted if I read strictly private.
The source suggests replacing that harshness with simple phrases like private repast or gathering for immediate family.
It sounds much softer.
It does. And the heavy lifter here, linguistically speaking, is the passive voice.
Now, this is interesting because usually in writing classes, we are explicitly told to avoid passive voice. Don't say the ball was thrown, say John threw the ball. We want active verbs.
Correct. In narrative writing, active voice is king because it assigns clear agency. It tells you who's doing the what. But in this specific context of boundary setting, the source argues that passive voice is a superpower.
Really? A superpower?
Yes. It advises using collective language or agentless constructions.
Give me an example of how that actually shifts the feeling of the sentence.
Well, instead of saying you cannot come, which is active and aggressive, or even we are holding a private lunch, which is also active, the source suggests writing, the family will gather privately.
The family will gather privately.
Notice the shift there. It isn't about the guest being excluded. It is entirely about the family's action. It shifts the focus to the family's fundamental need for privacy rather than the guest's status or lack of an invitation.
That is subtle but incredibly powerful. It makes it about them, the family doing something necessary for themselves, not about me being left out of a party.
Precisely. It depersonalizes the exclusion. It frames the repast as a necessary event for the family, almost like a medical appointment or a legal meeting. It's just something they have to do to survive the day. It's not a judgment on your worth as a friend.
The other big strategy the source mentions is the gratitude sandwich, or, as it's also called, gratitude as a social buffer.
This is critical. The sandwich technique is classic. You validate, you set the boundary, and then you validate again.
So a message like, "Thank you for coming to the service today," is the bread of the sandwich.
Yes. It validates the guest's presence immediately. It says, you matter. Your being here in this church was important to us.
And that affirms their importance before you draw the line. Even if the relationship literally ends at the church door, that relationship has been honored and acknowledged.
Right. It closes the loop for the guest so they don't feel like they are left hanging. It essentially says, your transaction with us today is complete, and it was deeply meaningful transaction.
I really like that. It provides closure. It prevents the guest from feeling used or dismissed.
Let's look at the specific wording examples from the source. I want to really analyze these because I think seeing it in practice helps solidify the theory.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Example 1. The source calls this the direct approach. The text is, "Following today's service, the immediate family and invited guests will gather privately. We thank you for your love, prayers, and support."
Okay, let's break that down. Why does this work so well? First, it defines the group clearly. Immediate family. There is no ambiguity there.
Right. No gray area. If you are a neighbor, you know for a fact you aren't immediate family. You don't have to wonder, am I close enough? I mean, I mowed his lawn once in 2004. Does that count?
Exactly. It completely removes the guessing game. Second, it uses that passive future tense language we talked about. We'll gather privately.
It sounds like an event that is just happening, like the weather.
Yes, it's inevitable. It's not a decision being made at you to exclude you. It's just a fact of the schedule.
And then the pivot at the end.
Yes, the pivot to gratitude. We thank you for your love. Notice it doesn't say, please go home now. It says, thank you for your love.
That's a great point.
It assumes that because you love them, you will respect the boundary they just set. It appeals directly to the guest's better nature.
It's very tidy. It's professional, but still very kind.
It is highly efficient.
Okay, example 2. The source calls this the appreciation focus. The text is, "The family will share a private repast with invited guests following the service. Your presence today is deeply appreciated."
This one feels distinctly warmer to me. Notice the verb change. Yes, share. The family will share. It implies intimacy. It implies a communal, quiet moment. It suggests that the repast is really about connection, not just eating food.
It's not "the family will eat lunch," which sounds purely biological. It's "the family will share a repast."
And then the closer. Your presence today is deeply appreciated.
That feels like a very gentle, almost loving way of saying, your part in this day is done now, and you did a really good job by showing up.
Exactly. It validates the guest's contribution to the day, which is their presence, while clearly signaling that the next part of the day is distinct and separate.
It treats the guest's attendance at the service as a gift. You gave us your time, we appreciate it. Now we must rest.
It's very gracious.
Now, example 3. This one is really interesting because it brings in the religious element, faith-based context.
Yeah.
The text is, "After the service, the family will gather privately with invited guests for fellowship and reflection. Thank you for keeping our family in your prayers."
This is a total masterclass in using shared cultural values to enforce boundaries. Look at the specific words chosen. Fellowship, reflection.
Those are definite church words.
They are high context words. By using them, the family is entirely reframing the repast. It isn't just a lunch anymore. It isn't a party with a buffet. It is a spiritual act. It is fellowship.
And reflection.
Right. It frames the boundary as a spiritual necessity for the family. We aren't excluding you because we don't like you or don't want to buy you a sandwich. We are gathering privately because we need to pray and reflect on this loss.
It makes the boundary feel holy rather than social.
It's very hard to argue with reflection. You can't exactly crash someone's quiet prayer time. Hey, I'm here for the reflection, pass the potato salad.
You really can't. It signals that the tone of the repast is serious and private, and it ends with, "Thank you for keeping our family in your prayers."
Which is a brilliant way to give the uninvited guest a job.
A job. Say more about that.
Yes. Even if you aren't eating with us at the table, you can still keep us in your prayers. You are still actively participating in the care of the family, just from a geographical distance.
It maintains the connection without requiring physical proximity.
That is so smart. It gives them agency. It stops them from feeling useless or discarded on the church steps. I can't go to the lunch, but I can pray for them on my drive home. It's an active, supportive role.
Now, this brings up a tricky point that the source touches on, which is cultural sensitivity. Because let's be honest, in some cultures, the idea of not feeding everyone who shows up to a funeral is absolutely shocking.
Oh, absolutely. The text calls this the hospitality variable.
Right.
In many communities, Southern cultures, various immigrant communities, African American traditions, Italian American traditions, feeding the bereaved and the wider community is the central act of the funeral.
Food is quite literally love in those cultures.
It is, and if you don't feed people, it is seen as a massive failure of hospitality.
Yeah.
Or even worse, a disgrace to the deceased.
Like you sent them off cheaply.
Exactly, like
Yeah.
the family is stingy or disrespectful.
So if you are in that specific cultural context, but you absolutely must have a private repast, maybe for financial reasons, or just sheer emotional exhaustion, how do you handle it? Because that feels like a massive collision of needs.
The source advises that in these cases, the wording must be even more thoughtful. You have to over-index on emphasizing intentional care rather than constraint.
You might need to add a line about the family needing a moment of rest.
Yes, you have to explain the why a little bit more to overcome the heavy cultural expectation.
But the source also specifically warns about the apology trap.
Yes, this is a crucial piece of advice for anyone drafting this. Do not over-apologize.
But why not? If you are breaking a major cultural norm, shouldn't you apologize profusely?
The expert view here is that excessive apology can actually suggest wrongdoing.
Oh, interesting.
If you write, "We are so sorry we can't feed you today, we feel terrible about it," it sounds like you believe you should be feeding them and you are actively failing at your duty.
Ah, I see. It validates their potential grievance. It essentially gives them permission to be annoyed with you.
Exactly. It makes the guest think, well, yeah, you should be sorry, my grandmother would have fed the whole town. Instead, the source recommends sticking to very neutral explanations. The family requests privacy is much better than, "We are sorry we can't invite you."
Stick to the facts. Stick to the actual needs of the family.
Frame it as a necessary choice for well-being, not a failure of hospitality.
Let's shift gears and talk about the actual look of this. Visual tone and design. The source mentions that you can't just slap this text anywhere on the page and call it a day. It's not just what you say, it's how it visually presents.
No, absolutely not. Design is a massive part of communication. The source discusses typography in depth. The font matters.
You don't want this in bold, aggressive red letters.
You don't want it in all caps either.
Keep out.
Right. That looks like a hazardous warning label. You want soft fonts, balanced spacing. It should look like a whisper, not a shout.
It should blend in with the overall aesthetic of the rest of the program. If the program is full of floral borders and elegant script, the boundary text should be floral and elegant too.
And placement is key. The source strongly suggests placing it near the acknowledgement section,
Why there specifically?
because the acknowledgements are the dedicated thank you section. That is where you list the pallbearers, the people who brought flowers, the people who brought food to the house.
Right.
If you put the boundary text right next to that profound gratitude, it connects the restriction to the context of love and appreciation. It softens the blow contextually.
That makes perfect sense. It's like saying, we love you, which is the acknowledgments, and now we're going to rest, which is the boundary. It flows very naturally.
The source also mentions the role of professionals here, like the funeral program site. These are people who literally do this for a living. They act as expert intermediaries.
That's a really good point. Sometimes you just need a third party to draft the text so you don't have to sit there and agonize over every comma.
Exactly. They have proven templates. They know the correct spacing and phrasing. They can help families draft this difficult text so it looks professional and intentional.
And when it looks professional, people are way less likely to question it. It looks like the official rules, not just a sudden whim of the family.
We've talked a lot about the how, but let's circle back to the why in terms of ethics. The source have a whole section dedicated to the ethics of exclusion.
This is a really important reframing because I think a lot of people feel immense guilt about this.
They do.
They feel like it is a profound ethical failure to say no to people, especially when those people are sad and just want to connect and share stories about the deceased.
And the source challenges that guilt directly. It argues that limiting a repast is not an ethical failure at all. It is, in fact, an act of care for the bereaved.
An act of care. That completely reverses the guilt trip.
Yes. We have to remember the fundamental purpose of the repast. As we discussed earlier, it is a continuation of mourning. It is a vital, necessary part of the healing process.
It isn't just a party. It's not a mixer. It's not happy hour at the local bar.
If the repast is a core part of the healing, then protecting that space is an absolute ethical responsibility. If the widow cannot begin to heal, because she is busy hosting 300 strangers and making small talk about the weather, then the repast has failed its primary purpose.
So by excluding people, you are actually protecting the integrity of the grieving process itself. You are prioritizing the deepest wound in the room.
Precisely. You are prioritizing the mental health and stability of the people who are suffering the most.
Yeah.
And that is always the ethical choice. It is placing the oxygen mask on the family first before trying to help everyone else.
That is a really liberating way to look at it. It stops being a selfish act and starts being a fiercely protective one.
It is. And the source notes that when families do this, when they communicate boundaries clearly and graciously, the practical outcomes are overwhelmingly positive.
How so?
Families report far fewer awkward encounters. They report significantly reduced stress on the day of the funeral. They actually get to eat their food.
And I bet the guests are secretly relieved too.
That is the great irony of all this. Most guests genuinely want to know what to do. They don't want to accidentally intrude on a private moment. They don't want to be the person who walked in when they shouldn't have and made things weird. Clarity is ultimately kind to everyone involved.
It really is. We completely underestimate how much people crave rules in awkward situations. We think freedom is nice, but at a funeral, freedom is just pure anxiety. Rules provide safety.
It reduces the stress for the person who isn't invited because they don't have to stand on the steps and wonder. They can just read the back page, go to their car, drive home, take off their uncomfortable food, and relax, knowing they did exactly what was asked of them by the family.
So we have covered a massive amount of ground today, from the absolute panic on the church steps to the highly specific passive wording on the back page of a keepsake document. Let's synthesize this deep dive.
Sure, let's pull it all together.
We started with the nightmare scenario, the sheer awkwardness of not knowing the social boundaries. And we moved to the solution, which is utilizing the funeral program as a communicative tool.
We learned that grief creates a massive, paralyzing cognitive load, and that written boundaries alleviate the immense burden of verbalizing no. It essentially saves the brain power for the actual work of grieving.
We learned about the linguistic strategies. Passive voice is your best friend here. The family will gather. It removes the personal sting. And the gratitude sandwich. Validate, set the boundary, validate again.
And we look at the cultural and ethical dimensions. That exclusion isn't meanness, it's self-preservation and deep care. It's about creating a safe, unmasked container for raw emotion.
So what does this all mean for us? Not just for funerals, but broadly speaking, because we promised at the top of the hour that this wasn't just about funerals.
Well, the broader implication is the overarching concept of gracious boundaries.
Gracious boundaries. It sounds like an oxymoron at first, but it's really not.
We so often think of boundaries as walls, as harsh, rigid things. Stop, no, don't. But this source teaches us that boundaries can be soft. They can be wrapped warmly in gratitude. They can be expressed through passive, gentle language that doesn't trigger defensiveness.
You can effectively say no without ever actually using the word no.
Exactly. And that concept applies to absolutely everything in life. Declining a wedding invite, leaving a dinner party early, setting limits with demanding co-workers, you can use these exact same techniques.
Affirm the relationship, state the boundary passively or as a personal need like, I need to rest versus you are exhausting me, and end with gratitude.
It's a crucial life skill. It's about preserving your own energy without burning bridges in the process.
It is. And I want to add one final thought from the source regarding the long-term impact of all this.
Oh, please go ahead.
Remember earlier when the source emphasized the program as a keepsake?
Right, the artifact that gets put in the memory box.
Because these programs are preserved for decades, the words we choose echo for years. If you write something truly gracious, that graciousness lives on in the memory of the event. Respectful wording honors the memory of the deceased long after the potato salad is gone.
It becomes part of their permanent legacy, that their final farewell was handled with ultimate dignity and profound care.
That is beautiful. It's not just about managing lunch traffic. It's about the legacy of the day. It's about the final impression left on the community.
Exactly. It's quite literally the last word.
Well, this has been an incredibly enlightening discussion. I honestly never thought I would get so much practical life advice out of analyzing the back page of a pamphlet.
The deepest insights very often come from the most specific niche places. The micro explains the macro perfectly.
Absolutely. So I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocation, a thought to mull over as you go about your day. We talked extensively about how the funeral program removes the assumption trap and saves everyone's cognitive load. So my question to you is this. Where else in your life are you relying on vague assumptions rather than clear, gracious boundaries? Is there a relationship, a work project, or a family dynamic where everyone is just guessing what the rules are?
And getting frustrated when people guess wrong.
Exactly. And how much cognitive load could you save yourself and others if you just took the time to write it down?
If you just created a clear back page for your own life.
Exactly. If you just wrote it down graciously and clearly, stop making people guess.
That is a very powerful thought to end on.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We truly hope you found this exploration into the Funeral Channel Network topic as unexpectedly fascinating and applicable as we did.
Indeed. It's been a pleasure. Until next time.
Take care, everyone, and go set those boundaries graciously.